Good morning, Little Masters, and welcome back to today's Tolkien Times. I'm the Man of the West, also from the Prancing Pony podcast, and let's keep week 65 going with today's Tolkien Tuesday. Now, it took us 5 weeks to work our way through Tolkien's thoughts about the Zimmerman adaptation. That's left us these last 2 weeks to work through some Q&A with the professor in Letter 211. Last week, we looked at the first 3 questions asked by Rona Bear, who was asking on behalf of her local group of Tolkien enthusiasts. We spent some time looking at Sam's elvish invocation of Elbereth, the question about Glorfindel and his horse's bridle and bit, and the much more complicated question of Sauron and the One Ring in Numenor. Today, we're going to start with our next question, which was a question we all know the answer to now, thanks to Unfinished Tales. What were the colors of the 2 wizards mentioned but not named in the book? And while we could give the easy answer, they're both blue, that would mean we'd miss out on an interesting reply from Tolkien. He says at the time, I have not named the colors because I do not know them. Now, this letter was, of course, written in 1958, so apparently his naming them the Ithrin Luin, the Blue Wizards, was still in his future. Tolkien continues, saying that he doubts if they even had distinctive colors. After all, he argues, distinction was only required in the case of the 3 who remained in the relatively small area of the Northwest, hence Gandalf the Grey, Radagast the Brown, and Saruman the White. Now, Tolkien also points forward to a later answer about the Valar, where he says that the Astari, as emissaries of the Valar and of their kind, had no true names, only identities, and their names were conferred on them by the elves, being in origin, therefore, all, as it were, nicknames, referring to some striking peculiarity, function, or deed. He then admits that he genuinely does not know anything clearly about the other 2, since they do not concern the history of the Northwest. He then explains that he thinks that they went as emissaries to distant regions, east and south, far out of Númenórean range, missionaries to enemy-occupied lands, as it were. What success they had I do not know, but I feared that they failed as Saruman did, though doubtless in different ways, and I suspect they were founders or beginners of secret cults and magic traditions that outlasted the fall of Sauron. Well, that absolutely fits with what we will later read in Unfinished Tales. Of the blue, little was known in the West, and they had no names save Ithrin Luin, the Blue Wizards, for they passed into the East with Curanir, but they never returned, and whether they remained in the East, pursuing there the purposes for which they were sent, or perished, or as some hold, were ensnared by Sauron and became his servants, is not now known. In fact, it's this letter 211 that is cited in the footnote to that passage in Unfinished Tales, so we've come full circle there. Her next question was really a massive series of questions, and we're going to have to give these a lightning round treatment if we're going to get to her last question. She asked first about the clothing that people wore in Middle-earth, before asking if the winged crown of Gondor was like that of a Valkyrie, or as depicted on a French cigarette packet. Then she wanted Tolkien to explain the meaning of the El prefix in Elrond, and the names of his sons, Elladan and Elrohir, wondering when it meant elf and when it meant star. She also wanted an explanation of the name of Legolas, and to know whether the creature the Witch King flew in on was a pterodactyl. Seriously, that's 5 questions in one. So let's see if we can do a true lightning round of Tolkien's answers. He didn't know the detail of the clothing, saying that he visualizes natural objects and scenery, but not artifacts. He does say, though, that males, especially in northern parts such as the Shire, would wear breeches, whether hidden by a cloak or long mantle, or merely accompanied by a tunic. He says that the dress of various cultures was diverse, and that it was based on climate and custom. And then he points out 2 specific examples. The first one, the Rohirrim were not medieval in our sense. The styles of the Bayeux Tapestry, made in England, fit them well enough, if one remembers that the kind of tennis nets the soldiers seem to have on are only a clumsy conventional sign for chainmail of small rings. Now, his next example is Gondor, and this is the letter where Tolkien writes that the Gondorians resembled Egyptians, particularly in their love of and power to construct the gigantic and massive, as well as in their interest in ancestry and in tombs. Not really answering the question, Professor, but he's getting there. He says that the Gondorian crown was very tall, like that of Egypt, but with wings attached, not set straight back, but at an angle. And he draws it, by the way, the letter is fantastic. He then points out something we've done here and on the PPP before, saying that the Northern Kingdom only had a diadem. That, of course, would be the Elendilmir. Now, as for that El prefix, Tolkien says it's hard to distinguish star and elf because they both come from the same element, El, meaning star, and so it can mean or symbolize either one. After all, he points out, the elves were found by the Vala Orme in a valley under the starlight, and they remained always lovers of the stars. He spends more time breaking that down between the Sindarin and exilic Noldor, but we're going to move on to his explanation of the names of Elros and Elrond. He explains that Rondo was a primitive elvish word for cavern, while Rosse meant dew or spray of fall or fountain. Elrond and Elros, he says, children of Eärendil, sea lover, and Elwing, elf foam, were so called because they were carried off by the sons of Feanor in the last act of the feud between the high elven houses of the Noldorin princes concerning the Silmarils. The Silmaril, rescued from Morgoth by Beren and Luthien, and given to King Thingol, Luthien's father, had descended to Elwing, daughter of Dior, son of Luthien. The infants were not slain, but left like babes in the wood, in a cave with a fall of water over the entrance. There they were found, Elrond within the cave, and Elros dabbling in the water. Now, Christopher Tolkien adds in a footnote to this passage that this explanation has been superseded by the translations he's provided in the index to the Silmarillion. Elrond, Elros, and Elwing are translated Stardome, Starfoam, and Starspray. The names of Elrond's sons, Elrohir and Elladan, both signify elf and man. Elrohir is essentially elf knight, Rohir, as in Rohirrim, the horse lords, while Elladan is a blend of El for elf and Adan, singular of Edain, for the men of the three houses who became the Dunedain. Legolas is green leaves from Lasse, or Las meaning leaf, and Lyca meaning green. As for the pterodactyl question, yes and no. Tolkien says he did not intend the steed of the Witch King to be what is now called a pterodactyl, but acknowledges that it is obviously pterodactylic. And there's something I want to try to find a way to use it more often. Well, I don't know, it's a little pterodactylic to me. I love that. And it owes a bit, he says, to what he describes as the new mythology, suggesting that its description means it might even be a last survivor of older geological eras. So much for lightning round, but I can't leave the last question untouched. She asked, who is the elder king mentioned by Bilbo in his Song of Eärendil? Is he the one? Well, the answer is, of course, Manwë. And Tolkien proceeds to explain to her a bit about the names, the bit that we read earlier about all the names of the Valar being given to them by the elves. Tolkien goes on to explain about Arda, Manwë's role, the fact that he and Melkor were brothers, and he ends with a clear statement that the One does not physically inhabit any part of Ea. That's not just Arda, folks. That's all of the created universe. So no, once again, to be clear, Tom Bombadil is not and cannot be Eru. Now, the rest of the letter is really, really good. It gets into some of the mythology and history, as well as the overarching themes of Tolkien's work. It's a really philosophical remainder of the letter. I want to take a look at it sometime, so whenever we revisit the letters, we're going to start here again. For now, though, this wraps up this week's Tolkien Tuesday. Come back in Series 9 to see what I decide to cover for the next 8 weeks. Which reminds me to remind you about the TTT schedule coming up. This is the last week of Series 8. The show is going to go into its usual 2-week hiatus until December 14th. And then I come back with a very special holiday week of episodes on Letters from Father Christmas for the week of December 16th. After that, I'll take my personal time off for the weeks of Christmas and New Year's and begin Series 9 on January 6th of 2025. In the meantime, please visit patreon.com/Tolkien Times to learn how you can join the Content Council and be a part of deciding what it is I talk about. You also get to support the show, get an ad-free feed, and a bonus episode every week. Join me again tomorrow on today's Tolkien Times for Word Nerd Wednesday. If you're watching this on YouTube, please like and subscribe, follow or subscribe in your podcast apps, and leave me a review wherever you find the opportunity. And follow @Tolkien Times on social media. Finally, as Faramir says, go with the goodwill of all good men.